Hello my friends, today I'm going to be teaching you how to build a set of roof rails for our asphalt super late model using a shrinker stretcher, and the material that I'm going to use is 48-inch long, 3/4 inch tall, 1/2 inch wide, 1/16 of an inch thick extruded aluminum that I picked up at the Home Depot. One of the reasons why we do roof rails, most people think it's because of aerodynamics. It helps keep air on the spoiler, helps the airflow over the car. I mean, really on short track racing, when we're doing 130, 140 miles an hour, the aero isn't a big factor. Mainly we do it because, one, it looks cool, and two, because of our asphalt super late models have fiberglass hoods, we don't have hinges on them typically. We take the hoods off, we set them on the roof, we work on the engine, we put the hood back on. The roof takes a beating, the roof number gets beat up. Just to try to keep that clean, we put these roof rails on it. It will wear the powder coat off the top of it, but it helps keep the roof in good shape. This is a stretcher. This is a shrinker. I picked these up from MOTORSTATE. They were like, I think like 175 bucks. They're pretty inexpensive. There are some more expensive ones out there. My personal set is a Mittler set. They work really, really well. I've had them for about 15 years. They were a bit more expensive than this particular set, but for a startup, fab guy, somebody that's just looking to get, the right tools just so you can get started, this is a really good option. If you look closely at the stretcher, you'll see how it works. When you pull the handle down, the jaws slide apart. It only goes about 1/8 of an inch, but that's all it needs. You'll run the thing through several times and back and forth, and you'll stretch it out and it'll give you a nice radius. Now, as you'd imagine, the shrinker works the exact opposite. It starts with a gap in the panel, and as you push it down, it pulls that gap together. This is my personal shrinker. Usually it's mounted to a table. It's got some bolt holes in the bottom that it mounts to. Rather than drag the table across the shop to where I'm working, I have this portable vise assembly. I just clamp it in there. It's got a heavy cast iron case. You can clamp it down pretty easily and not worry about damaging it. Before I get started shrinking, the first thing I do is I remove this crappy plastic. Everything I do I powder coat, so I usually remove that pretty early, especially knowing if I'm going to shrink it or stretch it, that plastic will get caught up in these jaws, and one, it's going to gum the tool up, and two, when you clamp on it, it's just going to allow the teeth to slide. It's not going to do its job efficiently. First thing we're going to do is it slides all the way in until you're butted up. If you have a longer seam here and you're trying to clamp on the end, it just doesn't tend to work as well. It'll cause it to kind of get rolled up right here. It'll get, lumps in it, and it just doesn't look as clean and smooth. So make sure that you're all the way in when you go to start shrinking. Apply gentle pressure on it, and you can see how easily that moves. This is 40 thousandths aluminum. The thicker the aluminum, the harder it is to get it to radius. So just go back and forth until you get the desired radius you want. Alright, now I've got the stretcher installed. This is from the shrinker. Now let's see what the stretcher does. Again, gentle pressure, especially when you're stretching. If you go to start stretching and you push too hard, it's really, really easy to break this material by stretching it too far. So back and forth, light bumps. Just give it a steady, easy push, and you can see how the stretcher works. It's stretching that seam, creating a radius. You go back and forth until you get the desired radius that you want, but be careful, because if you push too hard, you will split it. Let's see what happens if we push too hard. Oh, there it goes, right there. See what happens? Is it can't stretch far enough, it finally loses it and it splits. We've actually got another split developing right there. You just got to be really careful. You can avoid this from happening. You can stretch this thing to where it's almost a circle as long as you go slow. Once you go too aggressive at it, it splits and it's no good. Now this thing has lost all of its strength because it's got a split in it. Alright, now that we've gone over the shrinker stretcher and we've learned the basics on how they operate, let's make our first part. I'm going to start with this left side roof rail. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to use my edge scribe, and I'm going to mark a line on the back side of it so that I can line up my rivets and pre-drill my rivets before I start going forward. What this is going to do is, after I get it down and I try to drill it, my drill is going to hit on this side and it could take potential to damage it, as well as when you got it bent, it's really hard to measure out your rivets. So I'm just going to go ahead and edge scribe it real quick. I set it at 3/16 of an inch. This will give me a straight line the entire length of it. And you're probably asking, why 3/16 and not quarter? Quarter would be in the center. Again, because this is only a 1/2 inch, I use 1/8 inch rivets to do this. They're actually a little bit tight if you put them in the center to this back edge. So by offsetting it 1/16, when you drill it, it actually looks centered from the top side. I went ahead and I marked all my holes out. I'm going to go ahead and pre-drill those real quick, get that out of the way, and then as I move forward with building this, I can cleco it down when I get it where I want it. I drill my holes. I like to be about 6 inches between them. I'm using 1/8 inch rivets to hold these down. So having enough of them to make sure that it's solid and spacing out evenly just looks better and it's just stronger. All right, we're ready to start stretching this. The first thing I do is when I look at this, I know that this is a really, really gentle roll. All the way back, it picks up a little bit right here towards the back window, and then it's pretty steep right here. It's got a pretty aggressive roll in it towards the front side of the roof. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to start in this area to work that down. This is such a low roll that it's really, really easy to stretch that in. Start in this area. The best way to do it, set it down there, figure out where it is, and then make a couple of marks. So you're going to know that you're going to stretch from about there to about there. That's going to be, like I say, the hardest area to get going. Again, make sure you're all the way in against the stretcher, and then easy pushes. This is a little bit thicker than the 40 thousandths, so it's going to take a little bit more pressure. But again, if you put too much pressure on it, you go too aggressive, you're going to break it. Oh, it's not too bad to get started. We can go ahead and start working the rest of this down. It definitely is impacting on the roof right there, which is showing a little bit of a gap. So we'll go ahead and start rolling this all the way back and move forward. Alright, so right here, we've got just a little bit of a gap, which tells me I went just a little bit too far. That's not a big deal. I just got to put my shrinker back in there and take a little bit of it out. But before I do that, I want to make sure I'm finished with my stretcher, and I can see back here I've still got a gap, so I need to stretch this just a little bit more. Now there's two ways to stretch this. You saw me when I was going over the long distance, I was kind of like slapping it with my hand. That's okay as long as you're doing, low pressure. If you're doing high pressure, you got to get on it a little bit more, but you got to be really, really careful you don't break it. Back here, because I need to go a little bit further, I'm going to go ahead and use a little bit more direct pressure on it. Just whatever you do, just be consistent. Oh, that is absolutely perfect. Look at that. So here's a little bit of my gap here. I need to go ahead and straighten this out just a little, so I'm going to go ahead and change these dies. And that is just a perfect fit. All right, now we're almost finished up. The next step would be to take some 100 grit or 80 grit sandpaper and sand these tooth marks off. Every time you shrink or stretch something, you're going to get those marks. That's how the tool works. It bites into it and it yanks it apart, or it bites into it and crams it together. You're going to see that on every piece you make. So you got to sand those off and then send it to powder coat. Powder coat, it's got just enough texture to it that it's going to hide those. So between sanding them and powder coating it, they're just absolutely perfect, and they've got a really nice look to them. Before I actually finish these and send them to powder coat, though, I do need to crop the ends. Without cropping the ends, you're going to have this hook edge that hangs off there that could potentially, you know, grab a forearm or a hand, or somebody goes to push on it and they cut themselves. So I trim those off. And the best way to do that, I think, is I take my greens, I set it right up in the corner, and I put a little bit of an angle on it. On the opposite side, I'll use my red. So the problem with using the same one on both sides is I like to go right against the jaw, just so that I know that I've got it as flat as I can and there's no vertical mark before it turns to an angle. Crop those off there. We'll take them to the belt sander. We'll smooth those corners off. Ready to send them to powder. Here's a piece of the same material that I used. I shrunk this piece and it fits up inside of this fender. When it's installed, it creates a lot of support on the inside of that fender. A lot of times, super late model racers will remember how the tops of these fenders get really weak when they're mounted in the sun and the heat with the engine heat. Adding a set of these to the inside of the fender really beefs it up. That way your fat crew guys don't destroy your fenders when they're working on the engine.